Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Now, talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers and where they stand on everything. After a pretty busy free agent period, you could look at this team and think, like, wow, they addressed a lot of stuff. They brought in quarterbacks, completely reshuffled their quarterback room, getting rid of Kenny, Mason Rudolph, and Mitchell Trubisky, bringing in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields most of all on one-year deals, but still, it can't get worse at the quarterback position, really on the whole offensive side of the ball than it was last year. So those were improvements. They brought in Patrick Queen on the defensive side of the ball as well. And all of that to add on to Deshaun Elliott as well coming in, bringing in a new punter as well, all shuffling in and getting rid of some other other players that really just didn't make the cut and weren't falling in line with what the Steelers had in mind. They did a lot of chores in the offseason to try and get to this point. They cleared up a lot of space in salary cap, as well. So it doesn't feel like this team has many needs right now as it has had in previous years. And Mike Tomlin and Omar talked about it at their pre-draft press conference. It was something that was brought up to Mike Tomlin answering one of the first questions on how to address positions heading into the draft. What are they targeting? Do they feel that they need a position more so over the other? And he basically responded with, "We've been very active in free agency, and that makes you really comfortable as you lean in on draft weekend. We've addressed a lot of needs, so don't feel overly thirsty in any particular area." Just basically recapping what I just said. With free agency, it is out of the norm for the Steelers, in all honesty, to be that active in free agency, at least in recent years, towards the tail end of their previous general manager's tenure there, Kevin Colbert. They were never really one of the bigger buyers in free agency, splashing a good amount of money on Patrick Queen. If I'm not mistaken, he was or is now one of the highest paid linebackers, or one of their most expensive deals in free agency that the Steelers have made. So that's pretty uncommon. Not only signing Russell Wilson, that seemed like it was going to happen, but just I think a week or that weekend that followed, the signing of Russell Wilson, going out, being proactive and trading for Justin Fields, that was also out of character. And it's something that I never understood why the Steelers weren't more active in free agency, especially when some of their players were getting older. They were in a transition period after Ben. Salary cap, all that stuff, and being restricted by that is understandable, but they were never really in such a bad situation. They were always just signing players on minimum deals, not too many splash plays, and not that you need big signings in free agency, but it certainly does help when you're trying to win now, really most of all with the Steelers, trying to be one of the top contenders. You've been floating around that area for a while now. People, fans, most of all, are wanting to see you get over that hump, so that's a big positive for them so far. And also, later on in that press conference, talking about the draft, and at pick 20, if you follow any sort of reports on the Steelers, any sort of talk around the draft, at pick 20, it is as much of a toss-up as any position or any draft spot in this year's draft, because it's just almost right in the middle of everything, and it is too late for some of the top corners, possibly some of the top offensive linemen. A bit too early to go for wide receiver, and also too late because Odunze, Neighbors, and Harrison are all probably the top three. And if you're not getting one of them, it doesn't drop off tremendously, but you're not going to want to reach on one at 20. So that almost crosses that out, you'd think. I'll get to that more in a second. But it really, at this point, falls to offensive line. But I expect the best offensive lineman to go make a run from as early as 13 or 12 all the way to about potentially 16 with the Seahawks. So that's about 4 to 5 offensive linemen potentially off the board. And then do you want to try and draft one of them? On the thought about trading back because of everything that I outlined. Omar Khan had a very distinct opinion about it. He said, in my opinion, you never trade away from a good player, but obviously, if there's ever a scenario where it makes sense for both sides, it's something we will look at, we'll listen, and it doesn't sound like the most convincing answer if you think there's any chance of trading down. It sounds like there's no intention to trade down at this moment. It seems like teams will have to really come with an offer that they can't refuse. Similar to yesterday when we talked about the Los Angeles Chargers and their general manager, Joe Ortiz, talking about how they're approaching trading down or how they're going to handle their number 5 overall pick. They were really honest about it and saying, we're not moving unless we get the better end of the deal because it's so valuable. They expect it to be that way. It sounds the same with the Steelers, just not as much conviction as Joe Ortiz put it. And I mentioned the wide receiver position before and how I would touch on it just in a little bit. One of the most interesting pieces around the wide receivers, and it's no secret that the Steelers have been inquiring about receivers in the offseason, in free agency. You've heard Tyler Boyd be connected with them, Brandon Ayuk, Mike Williams. After Deontay Johnson was traded, it is realistic to see that position now be of interest, of need for them. You can't just go into a season, in my opinion, with George Pickens, Calvin Austin. They brought in Van Jefferson as well as Quez Watkins, but you definitely need more, especially in an AFC North filled with great defenses. You're going to need more on offense. Even T. Higgins to an extent as well. Being interested in him and being connected with him in some aspect, there is that. And the idea around the wide receivers and the Steelers so far is an interesting one because it has started to gain a bit more traction as it's gone on. And Mike Tomlin actually talked about it, how their wide receiver room is stacking up, how he is looking at it from this standpoint. And he said, pretty satisfied with it. He likes the trajectory of the group on and off the field, but you're getting contrasting reports from pretty reliable sources in some way. Specifically from Dane Brugler, a draft analyst for The Athletic, recently told the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show a few days ago that if he, meaning Brian Thomas, the wide receiver from LSU, if he doesn't go off the board before pick 20, I do think this might be the floor for him. I've heard the Steelers love Brian Thomas. Everyone wants them to take another character follower on day 2. My impression of the Steelers is that they're kind of sick of that. I think they'd love to just hit a home run with a guy like Brian Thomas in the first round. That was Dane Brugler from The Athletic talking about it, citing some sources and his feeling around it as well. He mentioned character follower in there. To explain that a bit more, there's always some receivers, not just receivers, but other positions as well with players that they'll seemingly drop for some reason, for off-the-field issues, for character issues, character faller. They fall because there is questions about stuff unrelated to football, and it just puts teams off a little bit, cautions them to drafting them, and by doing that, some of them fall. A lot has been mentioned like that with George Pickens, and you saw it in some instances this year. He had some fallouts on the sidelines. It didn't look pretty. It didn't look great. He is a great talent, but he fell all the way to the second round, you could say, because of that. The Steelers have been known with some of those wide receivers and being connected to them, trying to change them and kind of trying to corral them. We're going to have to see how George Pickens develops, and according to Dane Brugler, he feels like they're tired of that, and drafting Brian Thomas, in perspective, just in general, thinking about it, you can't go wrong with him. Brian Thomas is a great receiver out of LSU. I think if he was by himself, he would have been gaining a lot more attention, but because you have a guy like Malik Neighbors, it works two ways. You benefit a lot because the attention goes to him a good amount of the time, but also so much attention is on him that not a lot of people really get to study you and really get to know how good of a player you are. I think he's a great player. I think he has a chance to be a lower tier wide receiver one, but it's a good thing for the Steelers that they already have George Pickens there. But the question now becomes, drafting him at 20, is that getting the best value that you can for him at that spot? It is an interesting debate. I haven't heard too much, if at all, about wide receivers in the first. Really, it all has been filled up with centers, offensive tackles, and, that has always been the story so far with the Steelers, shoring up that offensive line because they want to run the ball. That has seemed to be the most popular of the whole situations, but drafting wide receiver, again, it is tough because of the talent. You need one, but it all comes down to value, really, at the end of the day. With Mike Tomlin saying something, it could just be another smokescreen, trying to distract their true intentions. You can't really trust anybody at this point in the draft when they're talking about something. So all of that, mentioning that, plus offensive line still being in need. If I were to make a decision, I don't think I'm buying that because I think it's just too early. If you're going to go with him, I think you might as well just trade down. I believe he'll still be there. But most of all, offensive line, center seems to be the biggest needs because they just don't have a center, a natural player of that position on their team right now. That seems to be the biggest need to me. They could have some other guard or offensive lineman to play center, but it's not the same as having somebody naturally to do that, to call out the plays and really be an anchor in there for the offensive line. And history's not also on their side. The last time Pittsburgh drafted a wide receiver was in 2006. Santonio Holmes around this same pick at 25. So it could be a wide receiver. It's a good idea, but the Steelers haven't done it in a while, and they have other positions of needs where the recent trend has been going in the second round. So I'm not really buying it right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Steelers try to make a move, try to see what's out there. If they can move up towards the top 10 and try their luck out there, maybe, but you don't want to take that big of a risk in the draft. And I just think it's safer for them, more Steeler-like, to just sit and wait and try and get a player that you hold high up on your board. But, again, you never really know with the NFL draft how it all pans out. That's where the Steelers lie right now. Those were my biggest takeaways on that. So, in the meantime, we'll put a pin on that conversation and we'll move on to another break in today's show. We're going to focus more on the draft after this break, talking about the Eagles, another team that's looking to make moves as they recently have in the draft, trying to move up from their 22 overall pick. I'll touch more on that after the break, and where Michael Penix and Bo Nix are sort of being mentioned to land in the NFL draft as well. So stick around, a lot more to talk about in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere.